Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. You're walking through, a beautiful sun-drenched historic city, maybe grabbing a coffee, heading somewhere iconic.
Yeah, soaking it all in.
And then bam, water guns. People are actually spraying you, shouting, "Tourists, go home." It
Yep.
sounds unreal, right?
It does, like something totally unexpected. But it's happening.
And that scene, it's pulled straight from reports in our sources, happened just recently in Barcelona. It's such a raw reaction, really cuts to the core of this growing tension.
Attention, we're really digging into today this conflict around mass tourism or over-tourism in Barcelona. I mean, it's a city seriously wrestling with its own popularity.
Right. And for this deep dive, we've got a whole stack of sources, news reports covering those protests, deeper analyses looking at the economics, even comments from residents and visitors sharing what it's like firsthand online.
Yeah, lots of different viewpoints, different angles on what's a really tangled situation.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack all of that. We want to pull out the main threads from these sources, try to understand the root causes of the friction, see who different people blame.
And also look at what's actually being tried, what solutions are on the table. Basically give you a clear, rounded picture of it all.
Because, while we're focusing on Barcelona, this clash, the pressure of huge visitor numbers versus the daily lives of locals, it's not unique.
No, not at all. You see similar tensions simmering in popular spots all over the world, maybe even places you know or places you've visited yourself.
So understanding Barcelona can maybe help us understand this bigger global pattern.
Definitely. So let's start right there on the ground. When you sift through these sources, what does over-tourism actually feel like for residents day to day?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is just the sheer number of people, the physical crush. Reports talk about serious overcrowding, and not just at the big tourist sites.
Right, it spills over.
Yeah, things like packed public transport, the metro, buses, and even into quieter spots like those inner city block interiors, the courtyards inside residential blocks. It just makes getting around your own city exhausting.
That constant pressure, it must put a huge strain on everything. And with the crowds comes, well, the noise and the disruption.
Exactly. Loads of complaints in the sources about noise pollution, especially late at night. They talk about turismo de borrachera, drunken tourism.
The party crowd.
Yeah, and the litter, the general disturbances that go with it. It just wears down the quality of life in neighborhoods.
And beyond the immediate nuisance, there's something maybe deeper. A feeling the city itself is changing.
Yes, definitely. Analyses point this out, how traditional shops, the places locals relied on, are getting squeezed out.
Replaced by
Souvenir shops, fast food, bubble tea joints, tourist stuff. It creates what some sources call a monoculture, kind of erodes the city's unique identity. We even saw a quote from a former mayor comparing the city to a theme park.
Wow, a theme park. That's quite a statement. It really captures that feeling, doesn't it? That the city is becoming a product for tourists, not a home for residents.
Totally. And that feeling, that sense of your neighborhood being taken over, becoming like unrecognizable, that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, feeling like a stranger in your own city.
It makes sense. And while all those daily impacts are chipping away, the sources consistently point to one massive issue that seems to be fueling so much of this anger.
Yeah, they really zero in on the housing crisis.
It comes up constantly, seen as maybe the critical driver, made much, much worse by tourism.
The figures we saw are, well, pretty eye-watering. One analysis mentioned rents jumping nearly 60%, 59.2% in just 4 years, between 2013 and 2017.
60%! That's huge!
And another report suggested it was between 30% and maybe even up to 68% over the last decade.
Incredible increases. How does that stack up against what people actually earn?
Well, sources put the average local salary around $33,000 a year anywhere. But the average rent mentioned was close to $15,000 annually.
So almost half your income just for rent? That's unsustainable for many people.
Exactly. And a big factor blamed for this in the sources is the boom in short-term rentals, Airbnbs and the like.
Right. The argument being that homes for residents are being turned into tourist lets.
Precisely. Because it's often more profitable. Now, the number of licensed rentals, maybe around 10,000 mentioned, isn't a huge slice of all housing.
But it's the impact, right? Where they're located, and the illegal ones too.
Exactly. They're concentrated in the popular central areas, plus you have all the unlicensed ones. It shrinks the pool of available long-term housing and just pushes prices up for everyone else.
And what's really interesting, or maybe worrying, that comes out in the analysis is who's actually doing this. It's not just small homeowners, is it?
No, not primarily. According to these sources, they talk about mega hosts, Big companies, investment funds, banks,
Yeah.
even foreign state-backed groups buying up loads of properties.
Okay, so this is where it gets into bigger financial plays.
Yeah. Reports describe how these large players scooped up devalued buildings, especially after the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
But instead of putting them back on the market for locals,
They converted them into these high-yield tourist rentals.
right. And some sources even talk about practices like land banking, just holding onto properties, sometimes empty, to deliberately keep supply low and inflate values.
Artificially driving up prices. And there was something else mentioned, too, about using property in financial markets.
Yes, this was quite striking. The perspective in some analyses is that property isn't just an asset for rent or resale anymore. It's being used as collateral for, and I'm quoting here, high-stakes bets in derivative markets.
Wow. So the property itself becomes almost like a betting chip in complex financial games.
That's the suggestion, that these big financial entities, sources name players like Blackstone, Deutsche Bank, can potentially make more money using the properties in these, abstract financial ways than through traditional renting or selling.
And the fallout for ordinary people in Barcelona.
Is that these homes are effectively removed from the local market. Supply goes down, prices go up, and people get pushed out. Reports are clear. Locals, especially young people, lower income families, they're being displaced, priced out of their own communities.
It really throws into sharp relief how global finance can hit local lives so hard.
Yeah.
And these impacts, they ripple outwards too, right? Beyond just housing.
Absolutely. The sources touch on other effects of this unchecked tourism.
Like the economy. Tourism brings money in, obviously.
It does. Figures cited are like 7.5% to maybe 14% of GDP. But the kind of jobs it creates is often the issue go above. Lots of low-wage, insecure work. Think seasonal cleaning, bar work, often with tough conditions.
Yeah, precarious employment. And does it affect the cost of living for locals?
Seems so. That influx can drive up prices for everyday things like groceries, not just rent.
And then there's the environmental side.
Right. Pressure on resources like water, which is a huge issue with the current shortages there, and pollution, with cruise ships often getting singled out in the reports.
A massive footprint from those ships. And socially. All this pressure must create friction.
Definitely. That feeling of being squeezed, overwhelmed, it can lead to resentment. Sometimes, sources note, that gets unfortunately directed at individual tourists, maybe unfairly, rather than the bigger picture.
Yeah, a sort of misdirected anger.
And there was also a point raised in some discussions about integration, a feeling among some locals that maybe longer-term foreign residents or even visitors don't always make enough effort, like learning the local languages.
Another layer to the social tension. Okay, so we have these daily struggles, the huge housing crisis linked to finance, wider economic and environmental strains. It's a really messy picture.
It is, which leads to the big question, who or what is responsible? And the sources we looked at offer quite a few different answers.
Yeah, it's crucial to lay out these different perspectives neutrally, just reflecting what's in the reports and comments. So first up, the most obvious target.
The tourists themselves. For some residents dealing directly with the noise, the crowds, maybe perceived disrespect, the blame falls squarely on the individual visitor. That's the anger you see in the tourists go home chants, the water guns.
That immediate visceral reaction. But other views look inward.
Yes. Some commentators argue that locals, the voters, bear some responsibility, either for electing leaders who let it get this bad, or even for participating themselves, selling properties to investors, converting their own places into tourist lets.
Chasing the profit themselves.
Right. We saw one specific comment claiming most of the pisos turísticos, the tourist flats, are owned by Catalans. So that's one angle.
Okay, and then there's a lot directed at the authorities.
Oh, absolutely. A very strong theme is blaming politicians and government at various levels. The argument is lack of effective regulation on Airbnb-style rentals, cruise ships, the housing market itself.
Too little, too late, or maybe just ineffective.
Both, according to some sources. They mention fragmented government powers, making it hard to act decisively, and a sense that short-term economic gain from tourism was prioritized over residents' quality of life.
There's that phrase mentioned, the money doesn't want changes to be made, suggesting powerful interests are blocking reform.
Exactly. And regret that action wasn't taken much earlier, before it became the plague it is now. They mentioned previous efforts, like by former Mayor Ada Colau, faced huge pushback.
Right. And connecting back to housing again, the big financial players.
They get heavily blamed in many sources. The corporations, investment funds, banks, seen as the engine driving the speculation that shrinks the housing supply and makes it unaffordable.
Yeah, we saw some really strong comments naming specific investment firms and their founders, basically blaming corporate greed for displacing people.
Definitely. And finally, there's a broader, more systemic view.
Looking beyond just Barcelona.
Yeah, framing it as a result of the global economic model. Tourism is this massive global industry, budget travel, making it accessible to millions. The argument is that the whole system prioritizes profit, a kind of survival of the fittest approach, over social good and housing rights.
So less about individual bad actors and more about how the global economy itself is structured.
Exactly. So it's clear there's no single scapegoat here. It's this tangled web of factors, and people point fingers in very different directions.
Which brings us to solutions. With all these problems and differing views on blame, what's actually being done? The sources show action on multiple fronts.
Yeah, quite a bit happening. Started with residents themselves. Citizen groups, tenant unions like the Sindicat de Hogares, they're really active.
How so? What are they doing?
Fighting for housing rights legally, but also direct action, physically blocking evictions, organizing things like rent strikes where tenants pay rent into a secure account instead of to the landlord, a kind of Japanese-style strike to build pressure.
Creative tactics and protests.
Yep, noisy ones too, caceroladas, banging pots and pans, sometimes targeting specific issues like buildings used for drug dealing that exploit the housing vacuum. And demanding bank-owned properties become social housing.
So, real grassroots pressure. What about the local government?
Barcelona's council is taking steps. They've restricted new tourist rental licenses, fined platforms for listing illegal ones, and the big one, this plan to phase out all 10,000 existing short-term rental licenses by 2028.
Wow, that's a major move. Effectively banning tourist flats and residential buildings.
Pretty much. They're also trying to buy property for social housing, go after speculative landlords, manage tourist flows better with more facilities, staff on the ground, tweaking transport.
And using tourist taxes.
Yes, increasing those too. The official line seems to be shifting towards visitors welcome, but locals first, and trying to attract, more quality, respectful tourists.
Are other cities doing similar things? Did the sources mention examples?
Yeah, definitely. Places like Amsterdam regulating noise and traffic, using zoning to keep local shops, using tech to monitor crowds, different taxes to spread people out.
And the news.
Entry fees for day trippers, fines for bad behavior. Dubrovnik and Bruges limiting cruise ships. Lanzarote apparently trying to discourage budget tourists. The Balearics banning new tourist licenses altogether. Lots of different strategies being tried.
So cities are experimenting. What about broader ideas from experts in the sources?
They suggest bigger picture thinking, rethinking the whole tourism model, diversifying the economy so it's not so reliant on tourism, maybe focusing on tech or creative sectors.
Using planning tools.
Right. Urban planning for better spatial management, maybe specific zones protecting residential areas, higher tourist taxes, stricter rules on cruise ships, using data for smarter visitor flow, encouraging visits to different areas or at different times.
Spreading the load, basically.
Yeah.
And what about the role of visitors themselves?
That comes up a lot. The idea that being a responsible visitor means showing respect, understanding local norms, maybe learning a bit of the language, supporting real local businesses.
And fundamentally acknowledging it's someone's home, not just a backdrop for your holiday.
Exactly. So pulling it all together from these sources, Barcelona is this incredibly complex situation, isn't it? Global economics, local social pressures, political action, all converging.
It really is. A fight to balance the money tourism brings with the need for residents to actually live well in their own city.
It lays bare these huge tensions in our connected world.
Yeah.
And considering all those different views on blame individuals, corporations, the system, and all the actions being tried.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How can you, whether you're planning a trip or maybe living somewhere, feeling these pressures yourself, be part of a better, more sustainable way forward?
Yeah. What does it actually mean to be a truly respectful visitor or a contributing member of a community that's wrestling with all this? Something to definitely mull over.